Hi, and welcome back to Leia's Library. Find yourself a cozy corner, get yourself something cozy to drink, and let's get started. So, today we are going to, as a sort of companion piece to the video I made a couple weeks ago or a month ago, time flies, about books that made my expectations do a complete 180 in that I thought I was going to love them, and I did not. So today we're going to be looking at books that I thought I would not like, and actually I am all about them. So yeah, let's get into it. And before anybody asks, yes, I did not cut my hair. This is a wig, if you couldn't tell by the shine. Yeah, let's go. This is my second time filming this because the first time I forgot to press record on my microphone. Take two! So, the first book on the list is The Invisible Life of Addie Larue by V.E. Schwab, which is an adult historical fiction fantasy. It is about a woman named Addie Larue who was born in 714, who makes a pact with a demon? ? A magical being of unspecified origins. And the pact is that she will live forever, but the catch is that no one will be able to remember her. So she spends this very lonely existence with no one being able to remember her until 300 or almost 300 years later, she finally meets somebody who can. So I initially had no intentions of picking this book up. The first time I heard about it was actually from another booktuber with Cindy, talking about the controversy of this book, which is essentially that it's very white, which is true. It is very white. And it's actually one of my problems with it, because like Addie lives for almost 300 years and she only goes to the United States and the whitest parts of Europe and barely meets anybody who isn't white. Just seems like a missed opportunity. But a friend of mine read it and loved it and convinced me to read it, and now I also love it. Again, I do wish there was more diversity, and one of the characters, in my opinion, is kind of unnecessary. See also, Henry is a sexy lamp. But aside from that, I really liked it. I loved it, actually. I loved Addie and watching her go through this unending existence with no one to turn to but the demon who put her in this position in the first place was just fascinating, and I wanted more of that. I wish the book had been all that and no sexy lamp Henry. But you know, even with sexy lamp Henry, I still really enjoyed it. But like when it was her and the demon, that was when it was so fascinating, and like just like as a character study, so fascinating. Also, the writing is beautiful. Oh my goodness, it's so beautiful. I still haven't read any other work by V.E. Schwab, but it is on my ever-expanding list, so I will get to it eventually. But yeah, I so highly recommend this book, even with those caveats. So yeah. The next book is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Jenkins Reid, which is a historical fiction, an adult historical fiction. It is about an aging and reclusive former Hollywood starlet who is infamous for her 7 marriages, and people have always kind of speculated and wondered and wanted to know the details of these 7 marriages and her life story, and you know, who was her greatest love of all time between these 7 husbands. But she's kept very sort of tight-lipped about it until now. She is finally ready to tell her life story, and she chooses a pretty unknown magazine reporter named Monique Grant to do the job. And everyone is pretty baffled, including Monique. But as the former star unravels her life story, it becomes clear that her and Monique's life intertwine in very unexpected ways. So this is not at all the kind of book I usually pick up. I like historical fiction, but usually when I'm reading historical fiction, it's either set around an event, so like it's usually set during World War II or World War One, or it's a Jane Austen book, but it's usually like historical fiction plus, or like Addie Larue had that fantasy element to it. So when I read historical fiction, it's usually not this. I typically don't pick up books about normal people living their mostly normal lives, so it's just not my cup of tea. So I was not going to read this book at all, even though I'd heard quite a bit of buzz about it. But then, yep, you guessed it, a friend convinced me to read it, and it was actually the same friend who convinced me to read Addie Larue. So thanks, Sam, if you're watching this. And I was hooked. I was so invested in Evelyn and her story. To my utter shock and delight, I loved it. I couldn't put it down. I loved Evelyn and her ambition, her ruthlessness, her relentlessness in her pursuit of her goals, and also in her love of her chosen family. She's very morally gray as a character. Like in her ruthless pursuit of her goals, she does some pretty questionable things, and she has zero regrets about them. Actually zero regrets. And it just makes her such a fascinating character, and I loved it. The last book on this list, which I know it's a pretty short list, it's because typically if I don't think I'm going to enjoy a book, I just don't read it. I don't pick it up in the first place. I'm a big fan of reading things that I enjoy. And I'm usually, if I think I'm not going to like a book, I'm usually right. So I don't have a whole lot of this book was better than I expected it to be books, which is why there are only 3 so far on this list. But who knows? Who knows what the future holds? Anyway, the last book on this list is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness / Siobhan Dowd. It is a middle grade / YA fantasy fiction. I've heard it described as YA, but I would personally put it middle grade. But anyway, it is about Connor, who is a young boy, and he has the same nightmare every night that he is being chased by a monster. But tonight, when Connor wakes up, there's a monster at his window, and it wants something from him. So I initially heard about this book from another booktube video by Murphy Napier, who, if you haven't heard of her, you should go look her up, because she's really cool and I like her. And this was during the beginning of the pandemic, so my local library was closed, and I was looking for books to buy, and I guess this one piqued my interest because I bought it, but by the time it arrived to me, I had utterly forgotten what it was supposed to be about, like completely. So, and the description on the back of my book did not give any sort of context. It was basically what I just told you. So I went in pretty blind and with basically no expectations, and oh my gosh, my heart, ow. I remember the exact moment when I knew that this book was A, going to be good, and B, was going to hurt. And it's the moment that his mother first appears, and she is wearing a scarf around her head. And at that moment, I knew that I was in for an emotional roller coaster, and boy, did I go on one. I lent this book to 2 other people, and was very insistent, like, you need to read this. And they messaged me after they finished it saying that they had sobbed, and they were so glad that they had read it, and they thanked me quite profusely for like pushing it on them, because I was very pushy. So I wouldn't even say anything more about it. I will just highly encourage you to read it for yourself. Just maybe not in public unless you don't mind crying in front of strangers. And those are all the books on the list for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you've read any of these books, please feel free to let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I would love to hear them. If you'd like to find me elsewhere, you can find me on Instagram as Leia Like the Princess, where you can also find my little embroidery and art store, Moonlit Cat Creations, or you can go directly to its website at moonlitcatcreations.com. Thank you again, and until next time, stay cozy.